I'm Emily, 32 years old, and the night of my birthday was supposed to be one of the happiest celebrations of my life. Instead, it became the stage where every illusion I had about love, loyalty, and family was shattered. The restaurant was glowing that night, the ivory room the nicest place I had ever stepped into. My friends and family were gathered, the air thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses. But then the laughter fell silent when my sister Lauren rose to her feet, her hand resting theatrically on a barely there bump, my husband Mark's hand planted firmly on her shoulder. "We're a family now," she announced with a smirk. Her words sharpened to pierce straight into my heart. The room gasped. My sister pregnant with my husband's child. I should have collapsed. I should have cried, screamed, begged for answers. That was always my role, the fragile one, the emotional one, the one everyone expected to crumble. But I didn't. I simply lifted my wine glass, let the silence stretch until it cut through every person watching, and allowed a small smile to tug at my lips. Because they thought this was their moment of triumph, but they had no idea I had written the ending to this story long before they walked into that restaurant. What they didn't know was that 6 weeks earlier, I had discovered everything. It began with a single mistake: a family iPad left unlocked on the kitchen counter, a notification flashing across the screen. The subject line read only 2 words: "Our plan." It was from Lauren to Mark. The moment I opened it, my blood ran cold. Line after line detailed their affair in nauseating detail, but it was the final paragraph that hollowed me out completely. Their plan was to use my birthday dinner with everyone I loved watching to publicly announce the pregnancy, forcing me into a quick, quiet divorce. Lauren had written, "She'll be too broken to fight back." She never fights back. I remember the sound the iPad made when it slipped from my hands and cracked against the tiles. It echoed the sound inside my chest as I locked myself in the bathroom and slid to the floor. For a moment, just one moment, I let the grief consume me. One silent scream escaped me as the life I thought I had dissolved like smoke in the air. But then the scream faded and something colder took its place: rage. I called Jessica, my best friend since college. My voice didn't shake when I told her it's happened. "But I'm not going to cry, Jess. I'm going to burn it all down." Because this wasn't just an affair. It was a disease of lies, and the biggest lie had started long before. For years, Mark and I had tried for a baby. Month after month, disappointment etched itself into my soul. At last, after endless pleading, Mark agreed to be tested. He went alone to Northwood Clinic. That night, he held me while I wept, whispering words of false comfort. "It's not me, Em. The doctor said I'm fine. It must be you." I carried that weight for a year, the belief that I was broken, unworthy, unable to give him a family. It gnawed at me in the quiet hours of the night, hollowing me from the inside. But it was all a lie. With Jessica's help, I got the truth. 2 weeks of digging, signed consent forms I pulled from Mark's files, and the right combination of persistence and desperation cracked the fortress of medical secrecy. When the email landed in my inbox, my hands shook so badly I could barely click the attachment. And there it was, the truth in black and white: zero sperm motility. A diagnosis of azoospermia. Mark was sterile. He had always been sterile. The man who had whispered to me that it was my fault, who had let me believe I was broken for a year, he had been lying with every breath. And now, standing smug beside my sister, he had orchestrated the most grotesque betrayal of all. The rage hardened into clarity. If he could lie about that, he could lie about anything. I dug deeper. I checked our bank statements from the month he claimed to have paid thousands for specialist consultations. Not a single payment to the clinic, but there was a withdrawal, $20,000 in cash. My gut clenched. I hired a private investigator. I didn't ask him to find out if Mark was cheating. I already knew. I told him to follow the money. 2 weeks later, he handed me a folder, and inside it lay the final nails for their coffin-steady payments, funneled to Lauren for her rent, her car, her designer bags. And worse still, $200,000 embezzled from Mark's company, funneled into a house now in my mother's name. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy. By the time my birthday dinner arrived, I wasn't the weak, fragile Emily they expected. I was ready, armed with every piece of evidence I needed, and as Lauren smirked and Mark feigned pity, I raised my glass. They thought they held the power that night. but they had no idea the script belonged to me. The silence after Lauren's announcement was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, feel the weight of every eye in that elegant dining room pressing down on me. My sister's smirk widened, as if she was savoring my humiliation, and Mark's expression was painted with that practiced look of pity, half concern, half condescension that he had perfected over years of lies. But I didn't crumble. I didn't cry or scream like they expected. Instead, I stood slowly, my wineglass still in my hand, and said clearly, to family and to the truth. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, savoring the ripple of confusion across their faces. Then I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the folded piece of paper I had carried with me for weeks, the truth I had been holding like a dagger, waiting for the right moment to strike. I slid it across the mahogany table to Mark. His hand hesitated before picking it up, his face shifting from irritation to confusion, and then as he read to pure horror. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice tight. That I said loud enough for the entire room to hear is the truth from Northwood Clinic. From last year. Gasps erupted around the table. Lauren's eyes darted between his paling face and my steady gaze. She had no idea what was coming, but I saw the flicker of panic already cracking her mask. "The biggest lie wasn't you sleeping with my sister Mark," I said, my voice as sharp as glass. "The biggest lie was pretending you could ever be a father." The words detonated in the room. My friends, my extended family, even strangers at nearby tables, all of them froze. The collective gasp was deafening. Lauren's hand flew to her stomach, her triumphant smile vanishing into horror. She turned to Mark, searching his face for reassurance, but his silence condemned him more than any words could. He stammered, You can't." But I wasn't finished. My rage had calcified into clarity, and I had waited too long for this moment. I turned to my mother, who had sat there quietly smug and complicit through all of it. "And Mom," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "That house you've been so proud of, the one you had put in your name. When Mark's company finishes their fraud investigation into the missing $200,000, they're going to want it back." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her hands trembling as she clutched the stem of her glass. That was it, the second strike. Chaos erupted. Mark lunged across the table, his mask completely gone, replaced by a twisted contortion of rage and desperation. "You witch!" he spat, reaching for the paper for me, for anything he could destroy. But before his fingers could touch me, the restaurant's security intervened. Two large men grabbed him by the arms, dragging him away as he cursed and thrashed, his voice echoing off the polished walls. Lauren sat frozen, her face a portrait of devastation. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by terror as she realized the truth behind her pregnancy, that the man beside her could never have been the father. Her hand shook against her belly, her breathing shallow. For once she had nothing to say. My mother dissolved into sobs, her carefully painted veneer cracking in front of everyone. The perfect image she had spent her life curating was in ruins, exposed in the most public way possible. And me. I stood there calm and steady, my purse slung over my shoulder like armor. Jessica was already at my side, her hand firm on my back, guiding me out. But as I turned, Lauren's hand shot out, gripping my arm with desperate strength. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in her before. I looked down at her fingers clutching me, then back at her face. She wanted me to save her, to somehow pull her back from the abyss she had so eagerly dragged me into. My final words to her weren't angry. They were cold, final. "I'd save your please," I said, pulling my arm free. "And I'd call Ryan. He deserves to know he's going to be a dad." Her face crumpled completely, then horror giving way to devastation as the weight of my words settled. I didn't look back. I walked out of that restaurant, the heavy oak doors closing behind me, muffling the chaos that had erupted inside. For the first time in a long, long time, I could breathe. That night was the funeral of my marriage, the burial of my illusions, the death of the girl who had believed she was weak. And as I stepped into the cold night air, I knew it was also the birth of someone new. The hours after the restaurant felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering there was ground waiting for me mid-fall. I expected to collapse, to sob myself sick in Jessica's passenger seat, but the tears never came. Instead, a clean, bracing quiet opened inside me, like winter air in my lungs. I slept that night for the first time in weeks. No looping questions, no replayed scenes, just darkness, then morning. When I woke, the silence in my apartment wasn't empty. It was spacious. It was mine. The practical storm began immediately. My phone lit with messages that swung from rage to bargaining, Mark's texts disjointed and vicious. My mother's voicemails pleading about appearances and what people will say. Lauren's single line that read, "Only can we talk?" I forwarded everything to my lawyer and lowered the volume. The legal work felt strangely grounding. There were documents to sign, accounts to freeze, a paper spine to slip into the soft animal of my life. The private investigator met me again, calm as a winter pond, and handed over the full chain, the cash withdrawals, the shell account, the steady drip of payments that kept my sister's life humming, and the $200,000 that vanished into a title company like a stone through ice. I thought again of my mother's key in the new front door, her little triumphant smile, and felt nothing but a tired, bright certainty I was done building houses for other people's secrets. My lawyer was surgical. We moved quickly. The medical report shut down the narrative Lauren and Mark had tried to trap me in. So did the bank statements. Their strategy had been humiliation. Mine was truth. In a cool conference room that smelled of lemon polish and war, we negotiated. Mark still tried his tricks, smirks, sighs, performative pity, but the pieces he used to control me were gone. Every time he reached for the old leverage, he found air. I watched it dawn on him: the spell had broken and I was not coming back. There were ugly moments. The first time I saw Lauren after the dinner, she couldn't meet my eyes. She kept twisting a napkin to shreds while her lawyer spoke for her. When she finally did look up, I saw something I'd never seen in her face: raw, unguarded shame. For a flicker, I felt the old ache, the big sister ache that wants to gather a child and shelter her from what she did not understand. But she was not a child, and she had understood enough. Compassion didn't mean returning to a life where I could not breathe. I made a promise to myself in those weeks: no more performances. If a conversation demanded I shrink to fit it, I excused myself. If an apology asked me to swallow my own wound, I declined. My boundaries were not punishments. They were a railing on a cliff keeping me from stepping into the sea. Healing did not arrive as a grand moment. It crept in through ordinary things. A pottery class on a Thursday night with Jessica, where wet clay took the shape my hands insisted upon. The first time a bowl didn't collapse in the kiln, I felt a foolish, giddy pride. I took long walks by the lake, the wind running its fingers through the water. I bought an orchid from the clearance rack, bruised and stubborn, more brown than green. I trimmed it back and set it on my balcony where the morning light could unspool across its leaves. I watered it the way I wished someone had watered me when I was wilting, gently, consistently, believing in what could not yet be seen. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday. I expected grief to arrive with the judge's stamp to surge up and knock me sideways. Instead, I signed my name and felt a thread go slack, like a kite string let go at last. The settlement was clean. The truth had a way of clarifying numbers. Mark's company, more concerned with their own reputation than his devotion, cooperated. There are some stains money cannot launder. On a gray afternoon, not long after my phone buzzed on the pottery table, I wiped my hands and read the alert. A local station had posted a photo of Mark being led away in handcuffs, embezzlement sentence attached like a coda to a song I no longer listened to. I waited for the rush, the victory I thought might flood me. It didn't come. What I felt was quieter and somehow more sacred: the click of a door closing, not with a slam, but with a long overdue finality. He had become a character in a chapter I had already finished. The book did not end with him. It continued without him. People asked me softly, hungrily, if I forgave. It is the question we fold into women like a note in a pocket: will you be generous enough to absolve what broke you? My answer changed as I healed. At first, forgiveness felt like a key they could use to come back in. Later, it became something else, a choice I made for myself to stop drinking the poison I wished would burn them. I can say now with an honest tongue that I forgave in pieces, the way a bruise fades under skin, yellow, then green, then gone. Forgiveness did not mean sharing a table again. It meant I could walk past their names without my pulse tangling. I did not return to the ivory room. I found a little cafe with chipped mugs and a barista who learned my order by the tilt of my head. I read on Sundays. I planted herbs in cheap terracotta and used them in my own cooking. The first time I laughed, really laughed, I startled myself. It happened at the wheel when Jessica tried to lift a bowl too early, and the entire thing slumped in her hands, a slow-motion catastrophe. We howled. It felt like something being returned to me with interest. One morning, months after the dinner, I stepped onto the balcony with my coffee and saw it the orchid had pushed a new bud from a stem I thought was dead. It hung there shy and certain. I stood barefoot on the concrete sun, warming my shoulders, and understood something I had always known, but never claimed I was not broken. I had been planted in the wrong garden. That night I lit a small candle and wrote a letter to the woman I had been steady, responsible, taken for granted, mistaken as weak, because she did not shatter on command. I told her I believed her now, that she had been brave in quiet ways, that she had walked herself out of a burning house with nothing but her name and her truth intact. When people ask me what I learned, I do not talk about revenge, I talk about reclamation, about building a life so honest it cannot be leveraged against you, about the alchemy of turning evidence into exit and exit into room to breathe, to make, to love again when love is ready. I still keep the medical report and the PI's ledger in a folder in my desk, not as trophies, but as artifacts, reminders of how easily a story can be rewritten when only one person is allowed to hold the pen. I no longer need to look at them. Their work is done. Mine continues. 6 months after that birthday dinner, my life looked nothing like what I had once imagined, and for the first time that felt like freedom instead of loss. The divorce was finalized, the settlement signed, and the headlines about Mark's sentencing were already fading into the churn of other scandals. My sister's name had slipped into whispers, not announcements. My mother, once so desperate to hold the family's social image together, no longer showed her face at country clubs. The Matthews family, once polished into a gleaming image of success, was a cracked vase no amount of glue could restore. And me, I was still standing. Bruised, yes, forever marked by betrayal, but breathing. Jessica was my constant in those months. She reminded me to eat when grief numbed my appetite, to laugh when the silence grew too heavy to keep walking, when I was tempted to hide under blankets. Together we signed up for pottery classes. At first my bowls collapsed into sad heaps, clay spinning off the wheel in clumps. But then, little by little, my hands learned the rhythm. I found something soothing in the centering, the way the clay resisted, wobbled, then settled as my palms guided it. It was messy, unpredictable, yet alive. And maybe that was why I loved it. For once, I was building something that didn't need to be perfect to have worth. The orchid on my balcony mirrored me. Once brittle and nearly dead, it had pushed out new leaves and a delicate bud. Every morning I checked it with a mix of awe and tenderness. It was proof of something I had nearly forgotten, that broken things could bloom again, given the right light. But healing wasn't linear. There were nights when I still jolted awake, sweat-drenched from dreams where Mark's voice whispered in my ear or Lauren's smirk flashed in my face. There were days when shame tried to creep back in, whispering that I had been blind, foolish, too trusting. I learned not to silence those feelings, but to sit with them, to tell myself gently, yes, that happened, and you survived anyway. People asked questions, sometimes with genuine concern, sometimes with thinly veiled curiosity. Do you talk to your sister? What about your mother? Don't you miss him even a little? I answered as honestly as I could. No, not anymore. Because what I missed was the person I believed he was, and that man had never truly existed. What I missed was the family I thought I had, and that family had only ever existed in my hope, not in their actions. One evening, Jessica and I sat on my balcony watching the sunset smear orange and purple across the sky. She asked softly, "Do you think you'll ever love again?" I didn't answer right away. The idea of love still felt like touching a bruise. But after a moment, I said yes. but not the way I did before. Next time, I'll love with open eyes. And I'll love myself enough to walk away if I see cracks forming. She smiled at me, then a proud, quiet smile. That's the strongest thing you've ever said. Strength. It was a word I had never claimed for myself before. I had always been the responsible one, the reliable one, the background character in other people's stories. But strength that belonged to louder, fiercer women, or so I had believed. Yet here I was alive after being gutted by betrayal, building something new from ashes. Maybe strength wasn't about never breaking. Maybe it was about choosing what you built after you had. One Sunday, I wandered into a bookstore and found myself in front of the journals. I picked up one with a simple leather cover and bought it without overthinking. That night, I wrote for hours, not just about Mark or Lauren, but about myself. My childhood, my dreams, my fears, the truths I had silenced. Writing became another form of clay, another way to shape the chaos into something that belonged to me. The story of my marriage had ended in a spectacular implosion, but my story didn't end there. It continued in laughter with Jessica, in the smell of wet earth on my hands at the pottery wheel, in the fragile green of new orchid leaves. It continued in the quiet moments when I stood at the lake breathing in the sharp air, knowing I was no longer drowning. And perhaps the greatest twist was this. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. Watching Mark in handcuffs, watching my sister's world collapse, that wasn't the healing. The healing was waking up each morning in my own skin and not feeling like a stranger. The healing was realizing I was not broken, only planted in the wrong soil. For the first time in my life, I began to believe that the ending of one story was simply the prologue to another. I sometimes wonder what the people at that restaurant tell themselves when they remember my birthday dinner. Do they recall the way the air froze, how the clinking glasses turned into silence? How my sister's face drained of color when she realized the child she carried could never be my husband's? Do they remember the chaos? Mark being dragged out screaming, my mother sobbing into her napkin. Or do they remember me standing tall, wine glass in hand, unshaken? For me, that night is no longer about humiliation. It's about rebirth. It was the night I stopped begging for love from people who fed on my silence, the night I chose myself. 6 months later, my life is quieter, smaller perhaps, but infinitely more honest. I no longer measure my worth by my family's approval or by a man's validation. I measure it in laughter, like when Jessica splashes clay onto my shirt and I laugh so hard my stomach aches. I measure it in mornings with sunlight spilling onto my balcony where my orchid blooms against all odds. I measure it in the steady rhythm of my own breath no longer held in fear. The world didn't end when they betrayed me. In fact, it finally began. Mark is serving his sentence now. I saw his photo in the paper, wrists cuffed, his face hollowed by consequences. I felt nothing. Not joy, not vengeance, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice had moved forward without my hands forcing it. He became part of a closed chapter, a man I once loved, but who never truly existed in the form I believed. Lauren retreated into silence. I don't know if she ever called Ryan the man who now unknowingly carried the title of father to her child. That choice is hers, not mine. I don't carry her secrets anymore. My mother too disappeared into the shadows of her pride, unable to face the world stripped of her illusions. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. And maybe that's the most important lesson. Closure isn't something other people grant you. Closure is the moment you decide you don't need their permission to move on. I've learned that betrayal does not define me. What defines me is how I chose to rise from it. I did not let it turn me bitter. I did not let it make me smaller. I let it burn away the lies, so what remained was something raw but real. When I touch clay at the wheel, when I write in my journal, when I water the orchid, I remind myself growth doesn't happen in the spotlight of perfection. It happens in the quiet persistence of refusing to die even when others bury you in doubt. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to say thank you. Sharing it hasn't been easy. It means showing you my most fragile wounds, but it also means showing you that wounds can heal, that even in betrayal, there is a seed of renewal waiting to grow. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you faced a moment that felt like the end of everything, only to realize it was the beginning of something new. If you have, I'd love to hear it. Leave your story in the comments below. Let's build a space where truth is louder than lies, where healing is stronger than betrayal. If my story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like. Share it with someone who might need courage to stand tall in their own storm. And if you want to hear more stories of survival of heartbreak turned into strength, subscribe to the channel. Every story we share makes us all a little braver. Because at the end of the day, family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the people who stand beside you when everyone else walks away. Sometimes family is simply yourself, the version of you who refuses to give up, who chooses truth over comfort, who blooms again after being cut down. I used to think I was broken. Now I know I was only planted in the wrong garden. And here, in the soil of honesty and courage, I am finally growing.